Greetings, y'all, and welcome to the Essential Rock the Bells new podcast series. I am your host, Stereo Williams, senior writer and managing editor for rockthebells.com. Today's episode, we are taking a deep dive and a look back at the classic 1994 debut from the Notorious B.I.G. That's right, y'all. Today, we're talking about Ready to Die. Ready to Die is one of the seminal albums in hip-hop and one of the most celebrated albums of all time. The debut from the Notorious B.I.G. is a potent statement and a declaration of who Biggie is as an artist. Equal parts funny and chilling, sometimes life-affirming, but often fatalistic, primed for the radio, but tuned to the streets. Decades after its release, what is it about the first album from the late, great Christopher Wallace that keeps us endlessly fascinated? Let's dive in with some of the most passionate, thoughtful, and respected voices in hip-hop media. Soren Baker is the author of 2018's critically acclaimed The History of Gangster Rap and co-author with Gucci Mane of the Gucci Mane Guide to Greatness. Baker has written for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, XXL, The Source, and the Chicago Tribune, among many others. In addition, he's penned liner notes for albums by Tupac, Ice Cube, NWA, Gang Starr, and more. He's worked on television programs for VH1 and Fuse. Baker's interviews appear on YouTube via his Unique Access Entertainment channel, and he also writes for LL Cool J's Rock the Bells and Flood magazine. Jaquan is a music historian, lecturer, narrator, and writer. Since 1998, he's been writing online about hip-hop, the art of emceeing, and the evolution of rap records. Jay is the founder and operator of The Foundation, a website that contains in-depth interviews with the founders of hip-hop, biographies and profiles of the legendary rap groups of yesteryear, as well as a detailed timeline which chronicles the history of rap records. Jaquan produces, narrates, and edits an acclaimed series of what he describes as mini documentaries called The Lessons on his YouTube channel, Foundation Hip Hop. He is currently producing documentaries, as well as authoring his first book, The Evolution and De-Evolution of Rap Music. Jaquan serves as the Minister of Information for Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and he's the official historian for the Hip Hop Museum in D.C. Additionally, he writes for Richmond Magazine, Rock the Bells, and Universal Music. Alexander Fruchter, known in hip-hop circles as DJ RTC, was born and raised in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood. He's been a mainstay in Chicago's hip-hop community as a DJ, journalist, and label owner for close to 20 years. Fruchter is the founder of the significant underground hip-hop blog Ruby Hornet, an accomplished DJ and an associate professor of instruction at Columbia College in Chicago. He's also the founder of the indie hip-hop label Closed Sessions and was recognized by the Chicago Tribune as Chicagoan of the Year in 2016. He is a graduate of Indiana University and currently lives in Humboldt Park. Seattle-based Chael Hidari Coker is the creator and former showrunner and executive producer of Marvel's Luke Cage. A 1994 graduate of Stanford University, Coker started his career in journalism as a staff writer for the Los Angeles Times pop music section. He also contributed to Rolling Stone, Premiere, Vibe, The Source, XXL, Essence, and numerous national publications. And he's been featured on VH1's Behind the Music and Netflix's Hip Hop Evolution. He's the author of the book Unbelievable, The Life, Death, and Afterlife of the Notorious B.I.G. Coker co-wrote with Reggie Rock Bythewood 2009's Notorious, a biopic about the Notorious B.I.G., and segued into television writing for Southland. Coker followed Southland with a stint as supervising producer on CBS's NCIS Los Angeles and co-executive producer for Fox's Almost Human and season 2 of Showtime's Ray Donovan. Coker's other feature film credits include Imagine Entertainment's Lowriders, co-written with Elgin James, produced by fellow alumnus Jason Blum, Creed 2, and an uncredited work on the Oscar-nominated screenplay for Straight Outta Compton. Coker was recently named number 42 on the Root 100's most influential African Americans of 2018. All right, guys. Yeah, man. Thanks for being a part of this. I'm geeked about it. It's a chance to talk about an album that, obviously is a hip hop classic. Also, I'm sure near and dear to, I don't want to assume, but I would assume we're all Biggie fans here. I was thinking about this album, and the thing about Ready to Die is like, it's up there with Illmatic, and like The Chronic is sort of like, what don't we know about Ready to Die? You know what I'm saying? Like we kind of know the short history of it. It put the East Coast back at the top of the mountain after a couple of years of West Coast dominance. But one thing I was thinking about that's sort of always been interesting to me, and I have my memories of 93, 94, but one thing that's always been interesting to me is you know, over the course of like, let's just say post Chronic, you have some pretty seminal albums come out of New York City, like Midnight Marauders, Into the Wu-Tang, obviously Illmatic. What do you guys think? What was it about Ready to Die that made it what it became, as opposed to those albums? Like, why didn't Into the Wu-Tang, you know, do that? Why didn't Illmatic do that? I'd love to get you guys' thoughts.
Well, I think for one thing, Ready to Die had a very singular narrative. The thing that happened, I can't remember which rapper said it, but when somebody said "Faces of Death on Wax," that was kind of the whole West Coast aesthetic of making movies, in terms of sonic movies. Like, for example, if you listen to like 100 Miles of Running, I mean, between all the different skits and dialogue, I mean, one could say that, yeah, Prince Paul really was kind of the pioneer of the narrative skit, with 3 Feet High and Rising. And then, of course, De La Soul is Dead. But when Dre started messing around with it, he started literally making blaxploitation movies that you were listening to, just in terms of how the skits fit together and just the different voices. I mean, it could start with something like Ice Cube doing the white voice on "Fuck the Police." That's a lie. That's a goddamn lie. You black motherfucker. Like, it starts with that. But then by the time you get to 100 Miles of Running, I mean, he's basically making like one of those American International Pictures, like Foxy Brown type, like blaxploitation joints. And at some point on the East Coast, because of all the message rap happening, it's like the narrative kind of got lost. And so what was interesting about from the first second that Ready to Die, that you're listening to it, it's structurally, it's brilliant. Like that intro where in the original version, they didn't clear was better than the version everyone heard, because, on the recorded version that everyone has, the opening song is Superfly. On the original version, it was Marvin Gaye's Got to Give It Up. And so you hear that song, you hear Biggie being born, and then by the time Rapper's Delight comes on, the family's falling apart. By the time he's in Audio 2, he's robbing the train. And by the time the Shiznit is playing, he's coming out of Rikers. And it's something that as a screenwriter, I mean, to be able to kind of capture that much time passing, but then setting a picture of how someone's life evolves. I mean, it's structurally, I steal from it all the time. I mean, it's you can't duplicate that shit. And whether or not Puff knew what he was doing, that was the thing, was that from the second you were following this journey of this character that's going to, go through all these different things, and then by the end of the record be so disgusted with himself, he kills himself. It was just like you were locked in from the very first second you heard it, and every song got better. And then he's just doing all types of shit like that you've just never heard before. I mean, even if you get to a song like, Give Me the Loot, yeah, Slick Rick has played around with voices, but when Slick Rick was doing it on Mona Lisa and other records, he was still using his same voice. Biggie was using different voices with different rhyme styles, like different people. It was some simple shit that was just like, yo, you never heard in your life.
Well, I think building off what Chael said, another thing that really made it different is that unlike Illmatic and unlike Enter the Wu, for instance, this was much better marketed, promoted, and the videos were better. They were bigger, they were different, and it was a steady stream of releases. Whereas those other records, it was much more spread out. And as much as this is a artistic, creative endeavor, we have to remember this is the music business, it's the entertainment business. And clearly Puff, more than Columbia Records with Nas, or even Loud with Wu-Tang, understood and knew how to exploit that through Puffy's experience with Uptown, obviously. So I think that's a huge thing. The remixes played into part of that. And obviously the storytelling, the rhymes and everything were top-notch, grade A, which is a huge thing as well. But we can't discount the effect of marketing, promotion, and the relentlessness of all of that plays into the popularity of Ready to Die and the singles that spawned from it.
Right. I have to agree, and to piggyback off of that and definitely agree with it. I'd say the big hits that came off of that album, if you look in remixes as well, I mean, One More Chance, you listen to the original One More Chance and then the remix and what it actually was able to do. the original was something that people barely listened to. You know, it was cool.
Yeah.
It had the tune of, you know, whatever the Jackson 5 tune that it had. But that DeBarge loop on the remix was incredible. Big Papa, huge record. You know, even Who Shot You, you know, as an extra, you know, B-side, it just was set up perfectly. And I would say the same thing. I'd say where Nas's album and Wu-Tang's album, you know, you had Cream and a few other songs that were big. These were big, gargantuan records that did well on the radio, but he still had the street credibility of Machine Gun Funk and other records. So I'd say all of that was a perfect storm.
You made a loop.
Yeah. But even with One More Chance, like the original One More Chance, the sample was All This Love from DeBarge. And then it didn't get cleared. And then they kind of had that, you know, that version of it that was on the record, which is only okay. But then doubling back and using Stay With Me, which is, oh my God. I mean, that record still to this day. And then the video as well. You know, it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, that's kind of the weird thing is that in a weird way, it's like just, you know, once you get into the intricacies of East Coast versus West, Bad Boy versus Death Row, in the early days, each label kind of set a precedent that helped the other label. So Death Row was the first label in terms of the music videos. Basically, you know, the trick that Dre and Shug figured out was, let's put a hardcore record that feels hardcore without using any hardcore language, meaning like the radio edit of Nothing But a G Thing, the radio edit of, you know, all those Snoop singles that were coming out. They felt just as hard as a street record, but, you know, but they were still able to get like, you know, mainstream airplay. And then the videos also kind of helped with that because they were breaking out of, you know, this, I know this sounds dated and crazy, but like, we got to take people back to the days when, you know, there were silos for videos where a video that played on Yo MTV Raps, whether it was, you know, with Ed and Dre on the weekdays or Fat Five Freddy on the weekend, didn't necessarily make mainstream MTV rotation because MTV was trying everything that it could to keep hip hop out of the mainstream. But then the records got so big they couldn't deny it anymore. You know what I'm saying? So it's like once, you know, Gin and Juice and once a lot of those, you know, records started breaking out of that hip hop kind of silo and just in the mainstream, you know, viewership. I mean, sky was the limit. And then next thing you know, when Bad Boy and Puff working with Hype Williams starts making those big videos, they also immediately get put into mainstream rotation. And so it's like, it's the radio stuff at the same time that you got the video thing happening. And then also kind of, I wouldn't call it a war, but Puff was always the one telling Big, you got to have radio songs. And Big was always resistant. And the compromise was like, okay, fine. I'll do Juicy. I'll do Big Papa, you know, I'll do One More Chance, but you got to give me the B-side. And the B-side is where you get Who Shot You. The B-side is where you get like so many of those kind of classic street records, you know. And that was Big's genius, was he really had a foothold in both, but didn't lose credibility in either.
Totally.
Yeah, I've always kind of summed it up as like Big's approach was almost like, and, you know, Puff, you know, actually Puff's marketing was almost like if you could take Cool G Rap and give him Heavy D singles.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like give Cool G Rap, is it good to you? You know what I'm saying? And that's Biggie, you know what I mean?
Yo, that's crazy. It's true though, but yeah, that's a great analogy.
And that speaks to everybody can't do that. I mean, G Rap is one of my favorite MCs. If I had a top 5, he'd be in it.
Right.
But G Rap, a few times, like he had My Life and a few songs where somebody was trying to, you know, get that Biggie kind of rotation. You know, Big L almost did it with MVP. He had a mix of that was radio heavy. But for Biggie, as visually violent as some of his story, like a record like Warning, that's a violent record. With a video that's very detailed and graphic, but it still got your daytime radio play. It was a big record. And again, as great as a G-Rap is or many others, there's not many that could walk the line of the big commercial record, but still get so much respect as a bona fide, you know, MC, you know, at the same time.
Yeah, because you want to think of G-Rap had Cars, which doesn't really compare to Big Papa,
Right. He had the joint with Nas. What was the joint with Nas?
Fast Life was really good.
Fast Life, right. Very much. You can see the bad boy fingerprints, on that record. But yeah, it wasn't, for him, it looked like it was like an ill-fitting suit. You know what I'm saying?
As great as he is. And then you had like the brother mentioned, I think Shio mentioned the B-sides, you had Dreams, which was something that people heard on tapes and stuff, but it actually got pressed up, So, and then too, I say, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I say the setup was perfect, and it probably most likely wasn't a setup on purpose. But the first time I heard Biggie, I think was on the Mary J. Blige song, "Look Up in the Sky, It's a Bird, It's a Plane." The moment I heard that voice, I said, okay, I never seen him. I said, that's got to be a fat guy. He had the robust kind of voice like people before him, like the Fat Boys, Kool Rock Ski, and even Big Bang Hank. There's a certain, that's a big guy. He had the robust voice, his cadence. Right. Then I heard him again on Dolly My Baby. And I was like, this guy's nice. I can't wait for him to drop. Then they drop Party and Bullshit. And I'm like, when this guy does something else, I'm there. And then Ready to Die came. So, I mean, everybody didn't necessarily hear those songs in that order. But for myself, I was anticipating Ready to Die, and it did more. It didn't disappoint. It didn't disappoint.
Well, that was the thing was, I remember the first time I even heard of Biggie was reading Matty C's column, Unsigned Hype, because I was a huge Source geek. And way before I had the opportunity to write for the Source. And I remember the issue when, with the picture with Biggie and 50 Grand. And I just remember staring at the picture for a long time. Like, you just looked at him and you were just like, yo, you want to hear what he sounds like, because the picture was just so like hardcore. I mean, I'm not overplaying it, but like, you got to understand, like when you saw the dude's photo, you were like, yo, either this guy is the shit or he's really whack.
Right.
There's no in between. You just saw the photo. You just knew that, like, I want to hear what that voice sounds like. And so then for me, that time that I heard the voice was, it was on Blue Funk. It was on the compilation song at the very end of Blue Funk, Heavy D's Blue Funk, the record of, A Bunch of Niggas. And when I heard him say, I bring drama like I spit on your mom, I was like, whoa. And he was just like, it was just incredible just how much presence he had. And, to think that he had that much presence on a debut where you're debuting next to Busta Rhymes and Heavy D and Guru, and there are a lot of different ways he could have just been treading water, but like he's still the person you go back to on that record.
I think that's a good point. Like, I mean, I was in, I don't know, 6th or 7th grade, so my experience with Biggie and this album was a bit different. My friend had it, and he moved back to my friend Dario moved back to Argentina and left the CD at my house, and I just told him I couldn't find it. So I kept the album. But I think that's what I keep thinking of. He presented a larger than life character in so many ways. And where Wu-Tang and Nas, to like my friends and I, was like, that was aspirational, but there's something about Biggie where no one can do what he is. He's just a larger than life iconic figure, where the other hip hop was maybe more accessible or more practical. And this was like seeing the video on the Music Box and things like that. It was, I mean, everyone's kind of said these things, but to put together is like a larger than life guy from the voice, the look, and what Puff was doing too. Wu-Tang didn't have the Puff component that I don't think can really be subtracted. There was just so many pieces and so much to dig into. It presented just this conceptual person you could like the music, like the people, and you just knew like, oh shit, this is something not happening before and maybe not again.
Yeah, there were certain eras in hip hop, like the summer of '88 and the winter of '93 into the spring, summer of '94 are just these two periods where just all these different records dropped that just like, for that '88, I mean, that was like when Public Enemy drops Taste of Nation and Millions around the same time that Long Live the Kane and EPMD Strictly Business and what else came out around that time?
Everything, man.
Follow the Leader. I mean, I just remember, I just remember that that every single time you got a tape. This is funny. I'm laughing because nowadays it's like you don't have to go anywhere to get music. I mean, nowadays you just open up your computer, open up your phone, and it just drops like everyone's got it. But back in the day, like you had to like go wait in line, like you had to go to the Tower Records, or in my case, I lived in Connecticut. You know what I'm saying? It was like you had to like travel to get a record, you know, being in a place, you know, near Hartford. Like it didn't come to you. Like half the time I wouldn't even really get shit until I went to visit my cousins in Jersey, you know.
And more importantly, you had to pay for it. You had to pay for it as well.
Right. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And then like or even if you copied it, like you know, if I remember like getting a copy, like right before I left for Spain, my cousin as like my going away present, she got, it was Long Live the Cane and Strictly Business, but she would only let me keep one and then made a Maxell copy of the other. And so, I ended up, forgive me, Kane, I ended up taking Strictly Business, got the Maxell copy of Long Live the Cane and listened to the Maxell Long Live the Cane till it popped. But that was the thing, was that like, you know, those were the kinds of choices that were being made. There was no such thing as, oh, let me just, you know, slide you something on my phone, or why don't you just get Spotify or whatever, or even have, you know, a 24-hour station like Rock the Bells, you know, but like none of that was there. So it was like, you had to kind of seek things out. It was, I could only liken it to like people that play Fortnite or some shit. Like, you know, there was like people that like a cult almost of just hip hop fans, and those records for those fans. And what was interesting is that Biggie was kind of a part of that cult. He was as much of a fan of everything that came out, and you hear all that studying once you finally get to his record. You know, it's just like he learned every single lesson that he could have from, you know, 88, 89, and put all that energy into what he was doing in 94. You know,
and he says it, you know, every day. Rap Attack, Mr. Magic Marley Marl, you know, Salt and Pepper, Heavy D. He was reading the magazines that we read, Right On and Word Up.
He was a rap nerd.
He was us.
He was a rap nerd, you know.
Yeah, he was. And that was a great point coming out of, you know, talking about Blue Funk, which I forgot about. That's another one between the Dolly My Baby and Mary J. Blige that really met my anticipation up for him. And I can only liken it to the first time I heard Live at the Barbecue. When I heard, and I don't want to get off subject, but Nas' shit was so ill. He was saying stuff that was so, it was inappropriate. It was dope. It was, you know, I think that was early 90s, might have been 91, 90. But I was anticipating his album, and that became what it became. So coming off of that, off of Blue Funk, you know, showing his ass on a posse cut with the greats, that is another thing that I missed. You're definitely right about that, bro.
Well, go ahead.
Tying into what Jaquan and Chael are also saying, and this is back to my original point about the marketing, is the steady stream. When we think about Illmatic, you know, you had Halftime and It Ain't Hard to Tell, and these songs were spread out. They didn't come out. It was years before Nas had all these breaks in his, when he would release something. And like with Live at the Barbecue or Back to the Grill, these are like verses. These are not his song per se. Whereas Biggie was on all these remixes or, 12-inch versions, but then he also, you know, once we got the album, then it was 3 or 4 singles coming out pretty quickly. And again, Nas is making It Ain't Hard to Tell or Halftime, and Biggie's got Big Papa, One More Chance. These are not the same type of records, even though lyrically what Big was delivering, you know, was the best or among the best of what was going on at the time. It was also palatable much more for people outside of what we then knew as backpack rap. This was able to, you know, appeal to the female demographic, appeal to the casual rap fan in a way that Nas and even Wu-Tang weren't able to do.
Yeah, like I was living in rural Georgia at the time. Like I'm a small town kid from the South. And you know, one thing that's fascinating to me about this period in hip hop is you were still kind of at the height of rap regionalism. And there were whole sects of hip hop that were completely cut off from each other. You know, like where I was growing up, you might have like the biggest bass music head who might know like 2 Rakim songs. You know what I'm saying? And in New York, you'll have the guy who knows everything Rakim's ever done, and you would have to explain who Luke Skywalker was. Like it was all very fragmented. And when I think of that time, Nas didn't break that barrier. And early Wu, if you remember, Cream was a later single from Into the Wu-Tang. Cream was the first song that I heard that broke through to like that sort of mainstream audience a little bit. But those early like Protect Your Neck, Chest Boxing singles did not go. Did not hit R&B radio. And R&B radio controls so much of the Black listening experience across America outside of major cities. Big Papa and One More Chance hit those markets.
And Juicy,
Yeah.
100%.
And Juicy.
And to have an album with those songs you just named, but also have Unbelievable on the same album,
Right.
and have people who are really, strictly like, Premier chopping up the beat type heads, but they won't sit on the fact that, Puffy Loops M2 made for Juicy.
Right.
It's totally fine because Biggie's so good with it. So I definitely say, to Sora's original point, that marketing and, maybe the power of Arista to get it out there, but definitely Biggie himself as a great MC, the marketing genius of Puffy coming up under Andre up to, I think all of that was a perfect storm. It was a perfect gumbo to get that album out there in the way that it was accepted by people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny because I remember the impact of the Chronic because I was going to college on the West Coast. And I remember when the Chronic hit in December of '92, I want to say. It was the first time that a record that I heard on the West Coast, by the time I got to Jersey and I was my cousin introduced me to Chino Excel, and I was hanging out with Chino, and we were on his block in East Orange. And every car passing was playing a different song from the Chronic. And that was the first time I'd ever heard a West Coast record have actual East Coast impact like that. It was almost like it was the beginning of something. And that was one of the things that, Matty C was talking about, saying the impact of that record, the impact that it had on Big was that his initial thing after he heard Snoop and he was hearing, the Chronic, he was like, yo, I gotta work harder. I gotta write something different. I gotta raise my level to a certain extent. And that was, I mean, I just piggybacking on what everybody's saying. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. It's like, Ready to Die was the perfect storm because it had all the technical, nuance of, 3 Feet High and Rising, Niggas for Life, like all the skits, all the how it all fits together. It had all the commercial marketing, taking advantage of every lesson that Puff, learned from Uptown, as well as, watching how Death Row was able to kind of, be mainstream without compromising their sound. And then at the same time, you got what Big's doing, just the pictures that he's painting and just how it all is kind of coming together. And then all of that, after all that happens, that is one of the things I think that has a heavy influence on what Raekwon does not even a year later with Only Built for Cuban Links, aka the Purple Tape. Is that just, when you compare that to Ready to Die, it's just like that's even a different kind of level. But Big was he carried all of it and as one persona. And that was kind of the most impressive thing was that when you talk about somebody that single-handedly had the city of New York on their back, Nas was the new Rakim, and Nas certainly represented the truth, but there was something about how Biggie did it. He did it in a bigger commercial way.
Right.
But at the same time, they were all pushing each other. I mean, like, I'm a jazz head, so it's the way that, like, Miles Davis and Coltrane were like pushing each other between Kind of Blue and whatever Coltrane record you want to put up against that record. It's like, but they're all playing with each other. They're all appearing on each other's records. It's like it's a rivalry, but at the same time, they're coming from the same place in a way that kind of makes iron sharpening iron, and so it just makes for just some of the best records that were ever made.
100%.
When you think about that, touches on exactly where I wanted to go next, which is the impact of that album on like a generation of artists. Because I was just having this conversation this morning actually about Nas, and the next Rakim tag was a big deal in '93. Biggie made the way I used to put it was Nas. The biggest hamstring in Nas' career was Nas became the next Rakim for a generation that no longer wanted a Rakim. Now that sounds harsh, but what I'm saying is Biggie recalibrated what success looked like for that kind of rapper. Like with Rakim and being the next Rakim, all you really had to do was have dope ass rhymes and drop a classic. You know what I'm saying? If you did that, mission accomplished. once Biggie happened, it's like, oh, you actually got to sell records. You actually got to be on the radio. You actually got to have mass appeal. And, you know, if you look at It Was Written Nas as compared to Illmatic Nas, I say that's the Biggie effect. So, yeah, you guys take on like his impact on that generation, because all of a sudden after 94, I don't think people were going to be satisfied with you being Rakim.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, so for example, like if you think about a record like OC's Time's Up, which to me is still one of my favorite lyrical records of all time. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, when you have OC coming out with Time's Up, when you got Casual dropping That's How It Is, you know, Either Coast, I mean, those are records that were like line in the sand records, like, you know, like just spitting and just like that appealed to, yeah, all of us as rap geeks. I say those titles, you hear the songs, you hear the rhymes in your head, you know, but the rest of the world is like, what's he talking about? Right. And Big was the first person to kind of bring that level of lyrical prowess to an actual, you know, radio hit that everyone's listening to. And then you're right, that became the standard. Is after that, it's like, okay, it's like you got to be lyrical, but you got to move units. And the labels, I think, I don't know if it had as much of an effect on the artists as it did on the labels. The labels, once they saw that it was possible to be lyrical and sell records, that's when people started getting dropped. That's when people started getting pushed in different directions that they might not have artistically wanted to go to. You know, I don't know. It's like, the thing with the Tribe Called Quest was that they always were able to follow their own dictates because the music was just so next level that they were, it was kind of like they were basically making Oscar-winning albums. Like It might not have blown up the box office, but because the quality was so high or Oscar level that they were forgiven by the industry for not being triple or quadruple platinum. Right. Because they just set an artistic standard that everybody wanted to follow. But if you weren't making records that had that level of artistry, then, you know, you find a lot of MCs that were lyrical and certainly might have deserved a different environment that were just getting stagnated or dropped or pushed into a commercial direction that they didn't necessarily want to go into, you know. And that's the thing, is that it's basically post 95, like everything changed, and just in terms of trying to kind of bridge both. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting. Like you're right. It pushes in a lot of different ways. I mean, like once De La Soul makes stakes is high, that's one of the stakes they're talking about. It's right. Like, you know, it wasn't just enough to be lyrically incredible and have dope music. They're talking about how the industry's changing, you know, and then the Roots are kind of, you know, constantly shifting their sound, but they have a live show that, you know, to this day, I mean, you know, the fact that you can turn on, you know, The Tonight Show, and there they are. I mean, what they were doing back then, they were setting themselves up for future success, but everybody had to kind of compensate for units or bringing that into their mentality. And that wasn't necessarily the case before.
That's a good point. I say, you know, going a little bit deeper into that, it became a time where, you know, it's very ironic that Stereo brought up the, as far as nobody wanted to Rakim. That does sound harsh, especially the way that Rakim is revered. But you're very right. That Rakim existed in a time where you didn't have to have a dance floor hit or a hit that the young ladies liked to sell records. You sold based on how good you were as an MC. He accidentally fumbled upon some records that were like, there was no formula. What I Know You Got Soul was a funky break beat, and it happened to fill the dance floors, where something like Follow the Leader didn't. You were listening. That beat was made for listening. There became a time right around Biggie, and definitely post Biggie, where you had to have something the young ladies like, and you had to have something that was a club banger. So hence Big Papa. Even the imagery on the video, even though it's a slow tempo, look at the video. It's a party going on. There's drinks in the air. I think after a while, even the hardest of hardcore MCs saw, I got to have something. It's cool that the fellas like me spitting however many bars, but I got to have something structured with 16 in the hook, 16 in the hook, and some singing on it. Like I said, even Big L with MVP. You know, he got some radio. I'm in Virginia, you know, which is mid-Atlantic, you know, not quite north, not quite south, a little bit of go-go. Where I'm at the tip of the, you know, the northernmost southern city, we got a lot of, it was an East Coast bias with us for a minute. But my point is that there was a time when it wasn't necessary to have those kind of songs. And post Ready to Die, you never forget the day we went to get those. I was buying tapes at the time because I had, I stopped buying vinyl. I had a car, and we went to get tapes that day. Me and one of my best friends, Antoine. That day, we always had a little competition between whatever I get is going to be better than yours or outlast yours. He got Stress, The Extinction Agenda, and I got Ready to Die. And to this day, I'm like, hey, man, as good as Stress was by Organized Confusion, this is the record that changed the game. It's Biggie.
Right.
So, and I bring that up to say that, there was Organized Confusion didn't have songs that the young ladies would dance to in the club or whatever on that particular album. But after a while, no matter who you were, coming back later with De La, they had songs with Shaka Khan and things like that where they probably wouldn't have ever thought of doing that in their early career. And I would say that's probably totally due to Biggie and his success in that lane.
Yeah, there was, I'm always pointing out in 96, there's like a flurry of those kinds of records. Like suddenly MC Lyte is dropping a song with Escape, and it's like a huge hit. And then suddenly Tribe has Faith singing a hook. And it's just like,
right.
Everybody, you can see the Biggie effect. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of see, go get an R&B singer, make sure you have something that can get played on R&B radio. And that was a big deal because again, I'm coming from the rural South, deep South, small town Georgia. And in the early 90s, it kind of goes back to what Chill was saying about that sort of cult of hip hop. That sort of like you have some tapes and like your cousin would hand you some tapes, friends would hand you tapes. In 91, it still felt like that. By 97, it was like there were more people in the conversation. I'll just say it.
Yeah.
There were way more people in the conversation in 97. And I think that the infiltration of R&B radio was a big part of that, because outside of major cities, the only hip hop that I would hear on the radio in like, let's say late 80s, early 90s tended to be the popular, Heavy D's, Salt and Peppers, your Fresh Princes, your Kid and Plays. Growing up in Georgia, I never even heard like Public Enemy on the radio. I got Public Enemy from Yo MTV Raps and Cousins. You know what I'm saying? Never heard NWA on the radio. Once you get to Bad Boy and Death Row, especially Bad Boy with One More Chance and Big Papa, and you're hearing Biggie getting played next to, and also at the same time, you got R&B artists all of a sudden they're like opening up to putting rappers on their records. So it's this cross-pollination that's happening. But by 96, 97, I think it's really telling that Yo MTV Raps went off the air in 94 because they didn't really need it anymore. It was like MTV, and it's not a slight at the show. I'm saying MTV was so oversaturated by that point with Death Row, Bad Boy, and so many other things. LL's Mr. Smith record was a huge, the videos were everywhere.
The thing is that MTV did not want hip hop to win.
Right.
The same way that, when I first started writing for the LA Times, Bob Hilburn was my primary editor, and of course for many years was the head of pop music for the paper. The winner of that war was supposed to be grunge. It was supposed to be, Pearl Jam. It was supposed to be Nirvana. It was supposed to be Soundgarden. I mean, and mind you, those records are classic. They really are great records. Particularly going back and listening to that whole era. But the thing was, I wasn't able to really hear that because I was part of the hip hop nation, and
right.
we wanted our side to win, and
right.
and we had the numbers, and we were constantly pushing through. And the powers that be did not want hip hop to win. SoundScan, won that battle, and then ultimately the people decided that that's what they really wanted to hear. But they were trying to thwart it at every end. The reason that they canceled MTV Raps was because it was constantly the most popular show, no matter when they moved the show. They kept moving the time slot. They kept trying to, you could always knew what time Headbangers Ball was coming on. You always knew what time other shit was coming on. But Yo MTV Raps could be at 8 o'clock, could be midnight. I mean, they kept moving it. And they kept trying to confuse people and because they didn't want it to win it, but it still won. You know what I'm saying? And that was the thing, was that, like, when you look at who's entering the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the artists that they're most excited about for the most part are the hip hop artists now, because that's who people are going to really tune in to watch, get inducted, and so like, that's the thing. I mean, hip hop won the war, but the problem was that we were at war with ourselves at the time that all this was happening, because of just a lot of, frankly, a lot of regional biases and bullshit, as opposed to appreciating like how, I mean, because as a fan, like, I appreciated how different every region sounded, but it was interesting how commercially there was a period of time where the West Coast, you had to have a West Coast sound in order to sell records. Like, a perfect album or song that kind of is like that. Like, if you remember Master Ace's Jeep Ass Nigga, and then
turned into Born to Roll.
Yeah, cool record, didn't really move units. He turns it into Born to Roll. Same lyrics, like same vocals, but just had a West Coast sound, and becomes this huge radio hit, and which was, I remember when that shit happened, I was like, damn, like that, but that's the thing, is that there was all this, there was that out there, and then the whole thing that happened at the Source Awards, and then it just getting like factional. It didn't really end, unfortunately, until after Big and Pac died. Right. That people said, you know what, this East versus West Coast shit is just, it's not, you can like records from anywhere. And I think that's when you kind of got the more of a universal embrace, because, nobody was dying over Otis Redding coming out of Stax and, Smokey Robinson coming out of Motown. You know what I'm saying? It was, and that's the thing, is I think people really finally understood that it's just good music is good music. And although, a lot of the stuff that happened had nothing to do with where they were from, there's a lot of other shit, but still, I think fans, I mean, and the crazy thing about it, if you really want to think about it, is the fact that there was that much chatter and that much, conversation without social media.
Yeah. Today it would be gasoline on a fire.
I sometimes forget how I even found music back then, and like the act of what you guys were talking about, like you had a group of friends, everyone bought a different album, you go to someone's house and like play these albums together, sit and listen. And then Ready to Die had that experience where, like you said, you're listening to a movie. It's definitely changed. But that's a great point. It was weird growing up in Chicago. Even people had to pick, do you want to listen to East Coast? Are you a fan of West Coast or East Coast? Right. We didn't know what the fuck was really going on. It just like, oh, this is there's some different sides right here. So it was it's really weird, as you pointed out, even in Chicago, like how that bled into your fandom, the geography, where before it didn't really matter as much.
Well, if Tupac had Instagram Live, he never would have made another record again.
Yeah, I shudder to think, man.
I didn't mean to interrupt what you were saying, Storm.
Oh, that's all good. No, I was just saying that we can't discount the Big Papa West Coast feel.
Yeah.
But on top of that, and as it pertains to everything that's going on, I think the irony, building off what Chael was saying, of the lyrical thing and rap not wanting, people in the powers that be not wanting to rap to succeed, we can't forget that around this same time we have Arrested Development, and we also have the Fugees soon thereafter. So the Fugees, broke through, but their biggest song is a cover song of an R&B song, and it doesn't have rap. So anytime the Fugees, when they rapped, it was kind of like, whatever, let's hear Lauren sing. And that became a big thing, tied into having the R&B hook and all these different things, which, that also played a big part in the direction of the music. And Arrested Development did a similar type of thing. It was more sing-songy. Domino with Ghetto Jam was a big record. So all these songs that were different sonically and didn't have this super Rakim, Nas, and even Biggie album cut level rapping, that's never been what the masses gravitate toward. All of us that have been to quote unquote industry events back in the day, you guys can all know there were no women there, none, or very few. And that's because they weren't drawn to some of the artists that we know and love, but they were drawn to Big Papa. They were drawn to One More Chance. They were drawn to Tennessee. They were drawn to Killing Me Softly. And that by default doubles your audience, or at least expands it exponentially. And
that's the point I made earlier. You had to have a hook. Yeah, at one point, it's just amazing that huge rap songs didn't have a hook. I mean, Eric B. as president doesn't have a hook. I mean, you know, not the original. They added Make a Clap to this later, but cats would just rhyme for how many bars with no hook. And that wasn't appealing to a lot of young ladies. I mean, go back and listen to Nas, It Ain't Hard to Tell. I don't think a lot of young ladies were necessarily loving that song, but like you said about him, the Biggie effect, when he comes back with If I Rule the World, he's got Lauren on the hook, and he's got the females, and he's got, you know, the males as well. So I think that's a very important point, that after a while, lyrical prowess took a back seat to, okay, song, what kind of song do you have? And a lot of great lyricists never made great songs.
Or they made songs that appeal to that, you know, you hate to say boom bappy backpacker.
That's what it was, though. Yeah.
My cousin calls it rapidy rap. You know, he's like, that appeals to that rapidy rap crowd, and I started using that term. But you get that with the emergence of Bad Boy. You definitely, I always use MC Lyte as an example because I love Lyte, and then I never heard Lyte on the radio when it was Cha Cha. You know, in the South, I never heard on the radio when it was Cha Cha Cha. I never heard on the radio when it was Cappuccino. Even Port Georgie, a record that when I go back to now, I'm like, this actually should have been like a big crossover hit. Wasn't really. But then when she does the joint with Missy Elliott, Cold Rock a Party, which Puff remixes for the radio, and she does the joint with Escape that samples the Michael Jackson song, she's all over. You know, they were like top 10 pop hits. Like, people forget that MC Lyte's two biggest radio hits happened. They didn't happen in '88. They happened in '96 because she went and got some singers. You know,
well, a far cry from the same person that made Paper Thin. It's amazing, the same person that made Paper Thin. And, you know, again, that was a certain segment of people that loved that. Right. And then, only a few years later, like you said, they're looping Diana Ross for a Puffy hit, definitely.
Right.
But then at the same time, like, you have a song like the Brandy I Want to Be Down remix, which was kind of like, if you did a parallel between the I Want to Be Down remix with, to a certain extent, Flavor in Your Ear, because it was the same. They didn't sound anything alike, but if you look at the videos, if you look at what was happening, you know, it was like you had the hook, and then you had each lyricist, you know. Well, in the case of Brandy, it was Latifah, it was Lyte, you know, and just like kind of representing. Like, I mean, that was the thing was that, like, you had a lot of female MCs that could also spit. And that were like, you know, were like lyrically just like, were able to do both. And so that's the thing, is like, whether it was, I mean, there are a lot of MCs in that era, like whether it's you know, Latifah or Moni Love or Mecca from Digable Planets or Lauren, who, you know, that was the one thing about the Fugees records is the fact that she's singing, but when it came time to rhyme, she was one of the best MCs out. You know, and then at the same time, you've got like, once you get to Lil' Kim and Foxy Brown, even the thing with Kim, even though Kim, you know, a lot of people want to try to criticize her for being as sexual, like her lyrical skills were never in doubt. I mean, that record, Hardcore, is an amazing, you know, like, particularly when you look at what MCs are doing now. If you go back to that record, I mean, you know, she's holding her own, you know. So it's like, it was just kind of an era where like everybody had to be lyrical, but at the same time figure out how to sell records.
There's, you know, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, man. I thought you were done.
No, go ahead.
Well, this is kind of what I think Soren was talking about, the parties, but something I just thought of too, like, so many records. I was a DJ, and so many of these songs just structurally fit well in the mix or within blending, even from Warning or One More Chance or Juicy. Some other records, like the lyrical shit, are some of my favorite songs. They just don't have any kind of transitional ability. And I don't know if that was conscious when they were making this project, but it's just, if you're talking about structurally with instrumental intro or outros in the chorus, like, as a DJ, you're able to do a lot with these songs and blend them in seamlessly with other records, where some other songs, or even like some of the Nas things where the verses are just so long or there's no hook, it's like really hard to get out of those kind of songs as a DJ, when these were all just super clean and easy to mix.
Well, that's one thing about Big, is that the way that Big rhymed, from a DJing perspective, he always left space.
Right.
Like, you know, You know, niggas get out, I'm more ass than ashtrays, ski mask way. Like, I mean, you can just like loop him endlessly, you know, like even a record like that, it's not like so many lyrics at your face. It's said in a way that you can just like backspin, you can go back and forth, and don't be mad, UPS is high. Like it's basically canned quotes, like you can just keep cutting back and forth with, you know. And on a lot of his records, he kind of spaced the way that he rhymed, he spaced his words out so that they had the maximum impact, and just in terms of what he was saying, how he was saying it. And, you know, you just immediately like remembering punchlines,
yeah.
You know?
He made like a simple statement, things done change, but the way he delivered it is such a power. I mean, it's just like such a powerful sentence, but it's simple words, but it's just, yeah, damn, that's an exclamation point on those verse on that song.
Yeah.
I guess lastly, I'd like to just get you guys' take on. We've touched on regionalism and things like that, and how Biggie was able to kind of cross so many boundaries at a time when hip hop regionalism was at an all-time high. And it's really interesting that you bring up Master Ace, because I always use him as an example too. Is like he was this Brooklyn rhymer who suddenly adopted this West Coast style, and he was getting played in markets that had ignored him up to that point, and many of them have ignored him since, even though he's done, you know, great indie work. But he told me directly that when he tours on the West Coast, he gets his biggest shows. He gets bigger shows on the West Coast than he gets in New York because of that period. It was his biggest commercial success when he was doing basically G-Funk records. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how pre-internet, I'm always pointing out that, to me, hip-hop regionalism in the 90s had its downside. We know that. But I also think from a creative standpoint, there was something to be said about an era when you could put on a rap record and it really dropped you into a time and place. Like when I hear Southern Playalistic by Outkast, it sounds like Atlanta 1994. Like it couldn't have come from anywhere else. When I hear The Chronic of Doggy Style, it sounds like LA, early 90s, post riots. You know, it just drops you right there. And to me, Ready to Die does that for New York City, 1994. It just feels like such a New York record. It feels so New York. Speak to a little bit of that. I'd love to get you guys' take on just the significance of that period and how now it serves as like a document for those cities in that era.
Every single record. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say every single record redefined a world. You know, it's kind of like how it's almost like blockbusters of the mid 70s, where it's like, you know, Jaws or The Godfather, or, you know, all these movies that kind of came out, they introduced a character and they introduced a world, and they weren't all interconnected, but it just seemed like every time you went to the movie theater, like your mind was blown. And that's what it was like buying records between, you know, I'd say 1987 all the way through 97. For that 10 years consistently, every time somebody came out new, they came out different. When they came out different, they had a different vibe and sound with them. And so that's not just true of the Far Side, it's also true of UGK. It's like every time you know, that's why I love going through like my tapes from that era, because it was just like taking a movie off the shelf. You put it in, and for that hour or 45 minutes, you were transported somewhere else. And that's, if I'm going to criticize the new generation for anything, that would be what I would criticize them for, is you don't necessarily get the diversity of sound in the same way. And I know a lot of people will be like, yeah, you old and fuck you, but like that's really the difference between those eras in that way, is that like
it really is. You don't know where these guys are from. I was riding with my son yesterday, who's 18, and he was playing. I asked him, I said, is that Lil Baby or Baby? Because I'm trying to understand who's who. And I'm being 100% serious. I'm not, you know, but like you know, a lot of it sounds alike, and I wouldn't know. You just made a great point. You knew where Too Short was from. Yeah. You knew where, you know, with the Bay Area MCs, they had certain slang, certain cadence, certain production. A lot of what I hear today, it does, you know, I can't say it kind of all, it's no regional differences.
I love how, you know, I love records that would drop spaces. I remember Common was living around the corner from me. I didn't know him. He told me later that he lived around, but when he shouted out WHBK, which was just the local neighborhood radio station, it made you feel like this is something bigger. And like, I just finished a piece on DJ Muggs and Cypress Hill, but I remember listening to them, and that they created those first 3 albums were a universe that you get lost into. And I think, Gio, you had a great point. Like, they were worlds where you knew where you are. I can't speak to what New York was like in 1994, but listening to this, I could get a good idea, even as a 7th, 8th grade, whatever, a kid. It's like, okay, this is grounded somewhere.
Yeah.
I'd say that was a great time I'd say one of the things that really made those other areas come up, New York had a stranglehold on the game from the first recorded rap in 79, almost for that whole decade through 89, really. It was, right, right around 88 when Straight Outta Compton came out. I think once those other regions came out and said, you know what, we're not going to try to impress New York or talk like New York or dress like New York. I'm not going to necessarily say that when Straight Outta Compton came out, the production sounded more. I think the production was just what it was. They hadn't really found their sound. But Dre was looping a lot of, Ultimate Breaks and Beats was what everybody was looping. So it all sounded New York. But once Outkast came and said, look, we're going to talk the country shit. We're going to do the videos with no shirt on. And, they talking about fish and grits and all that. Where at a time, I won't say you couldn't have done that. I don't think it would have worked at a time. When these different regions start saying, hey, let's just be ourselves. Let's talk like we talk. Let's talk with our accents and everything else. I think that's when the whole thing just opened up. And now you have subgenres of subgenres now because, that stranglehold was not there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the Bay Area was such a mystical place because it would have this regionalism, but it would all be in the same 30-mile radius of all these different sounds. Like, so the Loonies sound completely different than hieroglyphics, sound completely different than the Coup, sound completely different than what E40's doing and Sugar T and that whole, Vallejo crew is doing, which sounds different than what EA Ski is doing, which sounds different than what all the turntablism that was happening with Qbert. And then at the same time, you got Shadow around here somewhere. You got Peanut Butter Wolf and Charisma. Like it was like every single region of the country in one place with racial diversity and different sounds. And to be there as a writer, it was a trip. But then again, it also kind of prepared you for being able to have diverse taste for when you were being able to fully appreciate the rest of the sounds coming out from around the country. Like you couldn't really get locked into one thing. If you felt a certain way, if you wanted a kind of East Coast, like I used to call it hippity hoppity, you had clicks that you could follow there. But if you wanted that kind of like open West Coast, in too deep, riding your car type shit, that was there too. And so it was just interesting because you had so much diversity. And I think that's what, I really miss hip hop wise is that like every single place you went to had a different sound, a different move, a different movement, a different passion. But it wasn't always a level of disrespect towards anybody else. It was more like this fascination. Like, oh shit. Like it was just everything was like a new discovery to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's what I miss the most. Like that kind of I tend to blame the internet. Not blame, but I just think once social media happened and you could email tracks back and forth and like everybody got exposed to everything, which is good in a lot of ways, but it bred a sameness, kind of across the culture in terms of production and things like that. I wanted to also, we've talked about just about every track on this album, just through conversation. I'm looking like, did we miss anything? And I'm like, we even talked about the fucking intros. Like, it's like we literally, but one track that we kind of barely touched on that I want to get everybody's take on, I think is super impactful. Suicidal Thoughts. Like when I go back and I think about sort of the difference, I once said that the biggest difference between 80s hip hop and 90s hip hop isn't flow and it isn't production, even though those are the things that most people will probably get stuck on. To me, the biggest difference is introspection. You in the 80s, even the best rappers, it's very declarative, it's a lot of machismo, you don't get a lot of vulnerability. And And I think that the first record that I remember hearing that felt like a rapper going inward, and again, I'm not saying this historically, I'm wrong about a whole lot, so I could be very wrong about this, but the first record that I remember that struck me that way was a record called Dead Homies by Ice Cube.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, coming out of NWA, there's not a lot of reflection on Straight Outta Compton. It's just kind of like, I'm a crazy motherfucker from around the way. And that's kind of it. Dead Homies was the first time that I can remember a major rapper. Now, I'm sure King T might have a record. Short might have something earlier. But the first time I remember a major rapper kind of that was coming out of the gangster tradition who sort of stopped and went, my God, look at the toll of this. And after that, I remember Mind Playing Tricks on Me by the Ghetto Boys as a really important record in terms of a rap song talking about psychosis. But in terms of the mainstreaming of it, oh, and also shout out to Ghetto Bastard by Naughty by Nature, aka Everything's Gonna Be All Right. I think that's a really important record. If y'all remember that record, go back to that record. Tretch really goes inward in a way that you really hadn't heard a lot of cats doing on rap records before that. But as far as the legacy of guys like Scarface, Tretch, Cube, I still think that Biggie represents such a hugely impactful moment in terms of like the introspection on rap records and vulnerability on rap records. And a song like Suicidal Thoughts is like a clear example of a rapper just kind of going inward and dealing with depression, really, you know, in a very personal and very dramatic way. So I'd love to get you guys' take just on that song, period.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing that, you know, when people ask, like, where are the great novelists where are the great Black novelists of the 90s? Meaning, like, okay, why is there no Richard Wright? Why is there no James Baldwin? You know, it's because all that energy went into, I think, into these rappers, you know, in terms of talking about their experiences in their lives and kind of personifying what was happening in a lyrical fashion. Like, to me, a Biggie lyric, like, you know, from a record like Things Done Changed, where he says, back in the days, our parents used to take care of us. Look at them now. They're even fucking scared of us. In one lyric, he basically has written the equivalent of Claude Brown's Man Child in the Promised Land. In just one lyric. You know what I'm saying? And so at the same time, when you get into Suicidal Thoughts, you know, he is almost like, from his perspective, he's kind of talking about a point of view that you would only see when you would have, you know, some of the introspection of authors like Ralph Ellison or you know, or just the whole idea of just like, what does it all mean and who am I? And you know, I think sometimes people kind of dismiss hip hop because they don't think that people go that deep. But if you really start thinking about what they're saying in a way that people are consuming it, the eras are different. You could accomplish things in a novel that everyone on a mass level would read and think about. And that's what started happening with these records when they started making records that were more introspective, is that you were hitting people deeply in ways that they hadn't thought about before and just kind of slipping it in. And that's the perfect kind of record where it's like, for him to also show that he's keeping it real by talking about his life and experiences, but he's also portraying a character, you know, that's also something that weirdly, you know, it should seem obvious now, but back then, like for him to do that, it just seemed like, I think, kind of blew people's minds, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's perfect for the ending too, to add the cinematic, you know, I mean, he's fed up on the song, you know, look, I can't take no more. You know, you feel it. It doesn't feel like shock value, you know. At the beginning, he's like, you know, my mom is going through this. You know, my girl's about to have a baby. This, you know, I just can't take no more. It is a very vulnerable thing coming from, you know, a genre that started with just bragging about how good you were at whatever given thing. I think that was pretty groundbreaking for the time. Along with the song that you mentioned, Stereo, I will have to agree about the Tretch lyric where he was on Ghetto Bastard. He said, I've been through more stuff this week than a fly blowing that shit on the concrete. You know, like, right. I'm really going through it, you know, as opposed to I got this kind of car and I got, you know, this in the bank or whatever the case is.
Right. I remember the end of that song when it was popular, hearing that song for the first time. And the line in the Naughty song where he says, how will I do it? How will I make it? I won't. That's how.
That's how. Yeah. That was
happening. It's like, damn. You know?
That was happening. Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, even like, okay, Tupac was making some really incredibly introspective records. And then also what was interesting is like when you get to like Mobb Deep, I remember Survival of the Fittest, Havoc's lyric, where in the middle of it he says, you know, no matter how rich I get, I still want to live in the projects forever. That shit just blew my mind. I was like, yo, we are now living in Black Clockwork Orange. Like, I mean, because the whole point of everybody making records was to get out of the ghetto. And now you got somebody saying, I'm gonna represent for the projects forever. It was just like, even when people were trying to not have a message, they had a message that would kind of like, you know, make you think about a lot of things and make you contemplate where you were in life and what you really wanted, you know?
Well, I think too, this is a good point, building off a lot of what's been said, is to, even though they did it in different ways, this has really been something that's been going on since the 80s in rap. You know, we have Nightmares by Dana Dane, where he's trying to figure out why he's doing this. We have The Breaks by Curtis Blow, where he's lamenting everything that's going on. We have Hard Times, Run MC.
Right.
We have a lot of records that do this. LL did Fast Peg, for instance, or talking about a drug dealer's girlfriend that gets killed. And then even NWA, when you look at Fuck the Police, if you look at a lot of the lyrics, it's that same frustration that Biggie's channeling and Things Don't Change, Give Me the Loot, Suicidal Thoughts. These same ideas, these same things are, you know, they're manifesting in slightly different ways, but it is that frustration of searching my car, looking for the product, thinking every brother is selling narcotics. Like, no, I'm not doing this, and I'm being lumped into it. So I feel the way that Biggie feels. Right. And that's something that I think, as somebody that's always been a champion of the poetic nature of rap and the poetic brilliance of it, you know, from Schoolie D, Ice-T, all these guys are bringing, Ice-T had a song called Pain, you know, where he's referencing all the frustration and pain, like of being in the streets and being in the hood. And that's what Colors manifests as well. So I think to me, it's more of a continuation than a landmark moment, because we had Scarface, we had Ice Cube, we had all these other artists who had, in different ways, approached and dealt with mental illness. Even Millie put a pistol on Santa, since we brought up De La Soul a few times.
Yeah.
They did it as well. And this is the thing, that this is a constant in rap. Once, to me, the golden era really started in 87, 88-ish, where you have this explosion of the artists. But that's where, even before, we see it with the Curtis Blows, Run MCs, Dana Danes, these other artists exploring it. So it's been there. It's just manifests as the genre evolves. It just presents itself in different ways. Yeah. And Thoughts is obviously a brilliant example of it.
And I say I agree with that to a point. The only difference I say is those early records, even going back to Melly Mel, not only the message, but New York, New York, you know, a man's on the ledge says he's going to jump. It always felt like they were telling a story from the outside. They were illustrating, look what's happening. You know, this guy's eating dog food out of a can, whatever the case is. It felt just, by the time it got to the biggies, it felt more personal. Like, I'm going through this. Like, I can't take no more. Right. You know, your point is well taken, but you know, even with NWA, it felt like they were saying that for all of us. Like, hey, they search our cars, they do this. Biggie's thing just felt like, my you know, fuck the world, fuck my mom and my girl. My life is played out like a Jerry curl. I'm ready to go. Like, that was heavy. When I heard that, I'm like, wow, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys said everything. I would just add that kind of what Jay just said about the inwardness. But if we're looking at this and like we're seeing just the videos, it was mind blowing, because from the first few singles, and also just as a kid not understanding the music business, you see anyone with a video, anyone with music is rich, they're happy, their life is going great, and then you buy this album based on some of those songs, and then you have this eye-opening experience, like, oh shit, like you could be doing this, and that doesn't necessarily always make you happy immediately. Yes. And you can have this dichotomy, and that's presented throughout the album, where the first song is Things Done Change, Give Me the Loot, and then he gets to some better places in One More Chance, Juicy, those were he had the singles. But it just was interesting because it was presented single-wise, and then you get into it and it's like, oh shit.
By the record, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's funny because it's just like, these records are, in some cases, are just like, they're better experienced over years as opposed to months or days, because sometimes you'll go back to a record and have a completely different experience with it. So, for example, it's like, as much as I always loved Only Built for Cuban Links, you know, I would find myself kind of like skipping past the skits. And then all of a sudden, it's like I'm watching season 1 and 2 of The Wire. And then I go back and listen to Cuban Links, and all of a sudden it's like the skits are like, it's like I'm seeing them like visually. I just see them on the corner waiting for the re-up, and it's all of a sudden it's like all that unexplained language in between is just like it's almost like one kind of like something from one experience, you know, kind of prepares you for the other, and then you just get a full experience. And so imagine like what a record like that and a TV show, and the power of trying to, you know, explain culture to a people, and having records and shows that kind of, when you get the entire experience, do that. It's just really kind of an amazing time for hip hop, because of just all the different ways. And so like, even looking at like, I was watching the Lakers Golden State game yesterday, and I was when I was watching it, they had these Snoop Corona commercials, you know, with him walking on the beach. And, you know, probably for a lot of people, it's not a big deal. But I remember like when you saw a rapper in a commercial back in the day, like I remember just even seeing like Grand Poobah, you know, in a Sprite commercial, you were like, it was cause for celebration. But now it's just like, it's kind of expected. It's kind of, everybody knows who Snoop is. Whether they've even heard, half people that even like Snoop have never even heard or understood just lyrically how dope he is. Like I was with my sons the other day, and I was playing Doggy Style, and they were like, they had no idea that Snoop could rhyme that way, because they're so used to just knowing him as a personality and as a celebrity, not as an MC. Right. You know? True. And that's in a way the tragedy and triumph of a record like Ready to Die, because on one hand, you've got the beauty and brilliance of the mind of Christopher Wallace. The tragedy comes from the fact that he never got the opportunity to cross over and to live and to do a lot of the things that I think he would be doing, in the ways that you see Snoop and that you see Jay-Z and everybody else, you know, kind of bridging all these different gaps. I mean, like, having had the opportunity to personally meet Christopher Wallace, he definitely, I think, would have crossed over in the same way and would have made movies and would have done, you know, a lot of things. Tupac, you know, would have been an Oscar-winning actor by this point, you know. And the fact that they didn't get a chance to, you know, make it is always painful, but I'm also glad that we now recognize their birthdays. We now recognize the importance of talking about who it is they are and what it is they did on their birthdays, rather than, you know, constantly celebrating Friday the 13th or March 9th, the day, you know, the days that they died, you know. And like, that's the thing about, you know, just what's happening right now. It's like, we are finally in a space, not just as a culture, not just our personal hip hop culture, but as you know, just around the world, where they're properly being celebrated for being the geniuses that they are. And, you know, for me, Ready to Die is the personification of that kind of genius.
It is. And look where it took him, man. And just to go back a little bit, you were talking about at one time, if you saw a rapper on a commercial, how mind-blowing that was. If you heard a rapper collaborate with an R&B artist, especially somebody as big as Michael Jackson, he didn't do records with rappers. I mean, he was just, you know, discussing doing something with Run DMC back when Bad came out. But when he came out with his one of his albums, I can't remember which one, History, Biggie's on a song with him. And that's strictly on the strength of Ready to Die. He got that big that he caught the attention of Michael, where Michael, you know, got a verse from him. And that was incredible.
And being the kind of rapper that he was, because as I mentioned, you know, you had your pop rappers, but they were like pop rappers to people, like, you know, because Mike did jam with Heavy D in 91, and, exactly. And Janet did joints with Heavy D, but you expected that from a Heavy D. You didn't expect Mike to go get Rakim or Kool G Rap, you know, like the fact that Biggie could do that, you know, could rap about robbing motherfuckers, and then, you know.
And he did it on Michael's record. On the record, he said he had 2 pit bulls by his door, you know, for intruders. You know, he did it on a Michael Jackson record. Incredible.
Yeah, you know, he was still Biggie. You know what I'm saying? That's to me, that's what's so remarkable about him, is that he could sit at that table and still be, you know, a really gritty, dark, brilliant, you know, street rapper. Guys, this has been so dope.
Definitely.
Before I let everybody bounce, I'm gonna just embarrass myself. So like everybody shared their like when I found Biggie moment. And I always tell people I was embarrassingly late to Biggie, like embarrassingly. When I heard Dolly My Baby, I heard Party and Bullshit. I thought he was dope. I would be lying if I told you I was waiting, right? Juicy hit that summer, and I did not like that song at all. Oh, Juicy hit. And the video, if you remember, the video was all over MTV and BET. He was everywhere. And I just, you know, I was like, okay, I get it. He's the new guy. It's whatever. I was a big Nas head, you know. The moment that sold me on Biggie was the Flavor in Your Ear remix. Think about how late that is. The Flavor in Your Ear remix dropped between Juicy and before the album dropped. So the Flavor in Your Ear remix drops. Biggie opens it, and the moment I always laugh telling the story. The moment that made me a Biggie fan, the line that made me a Biggie fan was "Invisible bullies like the Gooch." Because I love Different Strokes. I loved Different Strokes. And when he referenced the Gooch, it was like the coolest reference I'd ever heard in hip hop. I was like, did he just say the Gooch? You got it.
He had a few of those. He had a few of those one-liners like that. That caught me too. I was like, wow, he watched Different Strokes. That's dope.
I was like, he said the Gooch. He's the first rapper in the history of hip hop to ever mention the Gooch. And after that, I was done.
Yeah. No, I mean that is kind of going deep. And I mean, the only thing that might have been deeper is that had he gone, you know, and mentioned like Snuffleupagus or some shit.
Right.
but if you really want to go back to our childhood, right? But, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, to you know, a visible bully, because that's the thing, you never saw the Gooch.
Never saw him. They talked about him. You never saw him. It was just such a clever, like, if you were a kid of a certain age that grew up at a certain time, you know what I'm saying? It was like,
it's a very niche thing, though. It's a very niche thing. I think most people wouldn't know who the Gooch was, and they didn't catch that from Different Strokes. And he still said it.
You know, rapping along and never really thought about what he's saying, but it jumped out at me. And it was just like, it summed up the things that made me a Biggie fan, which was he was a very intelligent rapper, just like his the level. You got to be smart to reference a lot of things that these cats reference. And he was hilarious. Like, you know, like he would say stuff that was just funny as shit. One of the best to ever do it, man. All time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, guys, I'm not going to take up any more of your day. I think we covered almost pretty much everything, man. Let's do this again. Next time, Vanilla Ice to the extreme. Let's break it down.
I'm ready.
Yo,
please, Hammer, don't hurt him.
Don't. Yeah. Oh, you got stories of both. Like, have you ever heard MC Search tell his Hammer story?
No, I gotta hear it.
It's one of the best. It's one of the best stories of all time.
Putting the hit out story.
Yeah, because that. Okay, you really got to. I don't want to steal his story. You got to have him tell it. But that's where the title of the album, "Please Hammer, Don't Hurt Him," comes from. That's Russell Simmons begging for those guys to rescind the hit. Please Hammer, don't hurt him. I mean, because really the craziest thing is, you know, the realest gangsters made the softest records.
Right. Oh, you don't want it with Hammer.
Oh yeah, shit, like you know, Tone Loc. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
He was. I mean, it's crazy. Like, you know, like like it would actually be funny to talk about those records, because I mean, even like you know, without To the Extreme of Vanilla Ice, you wouldn't have Death Row Records.
Right.
You know, because without Chocolate and without what happened with Shug and looking out for his artists, you know, a lot of things happen. You know what I'm saying? So it's crazy times. You know.
Yeah.
Yo, guys, appreciate it again. I think this goes live literally tomorrow. So,
great.
We'll make sure you see it. And if anything comes up, look for an email. But I think we're good.
All right, great.
Thanks, everybody.